After we talk about what kind of research question or how to develop your research questions and how to use literature and the importance of literature, we are going to go further a bit depth about literature. Is about how do we do it properly? We know literature is important, but how do we do it properly? And how do we, start writing or developing our literature skill in writing as well? So let me refresh your memory. The objective of literature review is not just about summarize the information about research. Is emphasize more about you read tons of information. Are you able to distinguish the differences within each field, and what can you synthesize the different perspective and to show some structure? Therefore, you will be able to identify specific problem, issue, or questions. But how can we do it? How can we get to the level to know, that's a gap? Because sometimes when we read some good literature, we just follow the logic and buy into it and say, yes, it's good. Yes, it's good. But after reading it, we just think about, I don't see that's a gap there. So where can I find a gap? And so therefore, there's some technique to know how to do it. So we were able to using the literature review as a part of our exercise and then to find the gap of doing that. So that's a technique, reading technique. First of all, you have to review. So review whatever selection you have, and then what you select those literature. And when you identify those literature you select first and skimming, so you can go through the text. But first of all, you always try to think about the literature you gather. Could be from the magazine, could be from the journal paper, could be from book. And sometimes you'll be able to use in different field or generalize by so-called, maybe you collect the literature from the same field, maybe from the tourism field or from the information system field or from communication field, from food, beverage industry field. So you will be able to have some kind of idea as a selection. And then after we skim it, we probably already highlight some interesting point. Then we start to decide which part of text is usual and useful. Some text would be useful, and it would be a quick reading through the abstract. So when you pick up the articles, probably you have a quick glance about, let me check the abstract. The abstract would be critical to let you know what you look into. And sometimes you probably think about the abstract is not so clear for you. You start to looking for the tables. Sometimes the author use table to help you to see something more, and then you will have a better idea. And of course, the further information you can read is introduction and conclusion, because introduction will tell you what this paper is mainly about, what could be a research question there, and what could be conclusion. What they mean is what could they suggested the finding can be, and the further study. So that can be some kind of hint when they give you a further study, say what's the future study can be, and that could be a hint about that could be a gap. And that is also a tip for you to know where to find gap and what was missing. And when you're looking it was easier. And the other thing for you to think about is what can I identify? So identify relevant section that could be, used in more detail. So here is indication. Sometimes you can find some arguments and in the literature, but if you study some argument, they're probably looking for the relationship between buyer and seller. And there also some study about relationship between business partner. And there's some study is about relationship between supplier and customer. This seems similar, but maybe at the end, when you try to look into, for example, you are looking to the trust, relationship on trust on between the partnership, between the buyer and seller, between the customer and supplier, you gradually can find out, that could be differences there. it may shows when it between supply and custom, they could be under the industry of operational management in supply chain. But when they into the buyer-seller relationship, that could be into some other elements. It could be the same as a buyer supplier customer, but it could be something else. And between business partners, sometimes they consider business buyer and seller are partners. But what could be? So that would be something as a hint for you to see that could be using different terminology, but you can start to circle. They all mention about trust and how they define trust. Sometimes they may define the trust as transactional relationship. Sometimes they may emphasize that trust is about long-term relationship. Sometimes they talk about trust is about power, the need or dependence relationship. So what they claim, what's the argument? So through that, even when they are talking about trust in different, concept about partnership, supplier, customers, buyer seller, you gradually may look into some gap there. There may be similarity, but there's still gap. And maybe you can go further to identify is anything deeper that can be as a gap. So you start to create a summary of the records. You possibly go through, for example, you go through the 10 articles. You start to have an idea. In each article, you start to write down some idea and look into, when they talk about relationship, what they say. This paper, that paper, that paper, and you gradually can do convergence, divergence idea. And then you can see a bigger gap. So therefore, in the literature review, you have idea to go through a few papers. Maybe I'm not going to ask you to do like a 20 papers, but if you go through like a 10 papers, gradually you may find something there, especially from the future study. They may mention similar area, or maybe they highlight some kind of industry differences. So therefore, you create the literature gap, because you identify, it's not you create, you identify the literature gap, so you can provide some argumentative piece that can identify further about in that research what could be the gap. Maybe like I mentioned about when you talk about trust relationship, maybe when they talk about in the buyer-seller relationship, they talk about long-term, but their long-term is based on maybe the industrial difference, because the long-term relationship by industry in IT could be different from the mechanical products, or compare with the banking industry could be different. So therefore you can further to look into from probably you can use an industrial difference, or if you collect data, highlight different type of industry to highlight, yes, it worked for long-term relationship, but the definition of long-term could be different, because there could be some penalized relationship, because that could be on dependence, especially it could be on the banking industry, mortgage, something like that. So I didn't go back that literature, but I just give you some hints about how can you create your arguments from the literature review and provide a gap. But at the same time, when you do the literature, you also need to think about a critical literature review is not just about I read, I synthesize, and I compare as a divergence, convergence perspective, and I write down the gap. That's good. But at the same time, to think about, can I trust the source I read? Where the source coming from? And maybe I can identify what are the main topic and the research question, are they relevant? So sometimes you probably do a lots of literature, and then you find out at the end you didn't when you look into the business study, you didn't distinguish the difference between B2B and B2C, the business to business or business to consumer part. At the end, you mix them together. So sometimes are you able to highlight the main topic, or are you able to distinguish further? Because in your identification process, you may miss out certain element, especially when you have a gigantic study. In that gigantic study, you probably need to go for a more segmentation, and then you can see, okay, because it's a gigantic study, maybe I need to focus more deeper, find a source. And if it's so much, you can look into for specific industry or specific terminology to limit your literature in terms of relevance. And then also looking for, are those findings consistent? If the finding is consistent, then you probably think about Do I miss out something? Is there's a gap or is consistent? Do I still need to carry on doing this finding because it's like a meet the saturation, everyone say the same thing, so it's applicable and it can be duplicated. So do I need to do this study? I probably think it may not worth it unless you have a huge argument. But of course your argument need to come with a literature. That's something totally against. That could be associated with some kind of a big issue, could be crisis related issues. So for example, some study, they always say policy, the government need to have a policy and to produce pharmaceutical product because policy is concerned with safety, concerned with ethical concern, blah blah. So all the medical are regulated. So that seems like a common finding. However, I bring back to the COVID issue. The COVID is jeopardize all this decision making because we desperately need the vaccination. So whether they need the government allow the publication of vaccination is through the thorough study or through a lot of journal article, scientific publication to prove it afterwards. That's a different story because the environmental crisis may change the situation, and that shows there could be a gap of the research in terms of moderator, because moderator is a social environmental. And what are the underlying assumption in the study? Sometimes they have an underlying assumption there, so you also need to read in the literature. Sometimes you think about, do they say it or do they assume it? And then you need to highlight, because that could be your argument to say this paper is good, they emphasize this and that, but those arguments as a kind of a induction to assume something that's supposed not to be as an end of assumption. You can bring your own further argument there. So therefore, in your literature review, be careful about what do you claim. I notice a lot of students, when they do literature, they possibly read about 10 papers or 15 papers, and they say there's not much literature in this field. And that is a big claim. Or relationships are crucial in terms of blah, blah, blah. And in terms of blah, blah, it could be they are talking about an ethical issue, and then they become a big subject, and they claim something based on their assumption. So be careful about when you try to claim value in your literature, that when you read it and you claim the value that literature didn't say it properly, you be careful about what you claim, because what you want is you want to create an argumentation from the analysis of literature, not just from analysis of your assumption. Okay, analysis of literature is try to understand what was the belief and what's the truth. Sometimes people believe something, but doesn't mean they have a truth. So the study finding, they may have some truth there, which is you can find a finding can be consistent, that could be a truth. But at the same time, if the finding is inconsistent in certain area and people still insist they are the same, then that could be a belief. So you need to be careful. That could be something to think about when you are going back to the literature to claim something. It'd be better to identify the difference between belief and truth, and what kind of evidence. Because some study, they use statistics. Some study, they're using qualitative data, which could be interviewed as a text base. In that sense, there could be some kind of ambiguity in the qualitative research to tell you this is some kind of proposition from the people I interviewed or from the qualitative data I have collected. Then that could be evidence, but this evidence support the claim could be part of belief because the sample is limited. So you can also in your argumentational literature say this study has been done in a lots of interview, in a lots of maybe case studies, etc. However, there's no scientific way in terms of survey or questionnaire to help you to gather a bigger number of data, maybe 200 people or 300 companies, etc., to prove that is echoing what the interview findings say. So that is another evidence. You can claim something has been done in the past, yet but are they supportive or are they sufficient enough? So that's to do with are they suggest some kind of evidence to do. So in terms of literature, they have a different type of literature review. They have they have traditional literature review and systematic literature review. So traditional literature review is you read the about the literature and then you have a conclusion about the topic on the research. But what we do here, when we want to do the scientific study, we want to have a more systematic approach. The systematic approach is focused on a topic within a field or within the field, and we are looking for a topic. And also try to identify and synthesize all relevant study in that given topic, so you will be able to know to filter down the topic and filter down maybe from you probably type if you Google type trust in business study, you probably find billions of paper there. But if you start to looking for trust in B2B marketing, then you start to find maybe thousands of paper there. But if you type down B2B in service industry of service management, and then you start to see the difference, because service industry may have a different idea of the other type of industry. So this is something to help you to see how can you be more able to narrow down a bit in terms of being more systematic, and how to be able to identify it. I might looking for a more scientific paper, which I mentioned last time, what is considered a peer review articles that you can do. The other way of systematic searching of your study is here is an example. So you have internet, you have library, but among internet and library, they may categorize the same way. In terms of library category, online database, they may have a Google Scholar. Some Google Scholar user, they have a library to access as well. And there's some other elements here, which I mentioned here before. So in a library, they also categorize different things in terms of past study or some kind of subscription or electronic resource. So online database, they have a different way of showing. That could be journal, could be catalog, could be some international digital library that you can access further. So the other thing could be some kind of non-profitable source as a kind of their library, so you can access. And some other thing could be online media or some kind of bank data or government data agency you can access. So this is some kind of information you can search. But once you're able to access those literature, the challenge is if you happen to read 30 journals and 10 books and 15 magazine articles, you probably get lost about what do I read and what is that about. So there's a way to organize your study, or sometimes you probably read one paper and think about that could be some relevance. How can I search it? So here is a way to show you another information. You can use in some kind of tool, so-called EndNote. So they have a reference way. They show you where the author can be the name of author, the publication year. If you just want to pick up the within 5-year publication, and then you can quickly reading about the title, so that would be help you to go back to selecting about which paper you're going to read. And also they can allow you to attach the file, so sometimes you collect it and you can go back. It help you to refresh your memory. The other is from the import your reference in the other material. So sometimes you go for the database online, you start to looking for some article you're interested, and you start to export the file, and then you will be able to save it. And then they will give you some kind of abstract keywords. When they're using the keyword, you can help you to identify whether your keyword is relevant to theirs, and it will be also help you to save the file into your like an EndNote. The other thing is using Google Scholar. So the Google Scholar here is quite commonly see how can we do it. It's because you, for example, I type the service value and B2B marketing. So you can see the publication. There are only few publication, or maybe they're following, but they could be quite dated, but there are few publication. So I want to import my reference from the Google Scholar, so I just need to check cite and see how many people cite it. So indicate this paper may be considered recent, but a lot of people are interested, so they've been cited. So it's also considered a good reference about a good article that you can consider to use it. So this is another information, but this is, look at it, this is published a couple years ago and already got 42 cited. This could be a little bit longer distance, longer period time before, and it also have a high cite in terms of the period time. But look at this recent and a high cited, and also you start to look into, so what make it difference, and start to identify, okay, this could be interesting, but this is about to talk about engagement, and then you also look into maybe this journal is good journal. I mentioned about the ABS rank, so probably you can think about is this a top journal because within such a short period of time already got high cite, or is this a journal ranking is good enough, or is this journal ranking a little bit lower compared with others. And so sometimes using journal rank, a higher journal rank generally have a quicker cite. So this is another reference. So when you have a lot of reference identified, and you can use in journal rank to segmentate the key journal, and that you also an indicator for you to look into which journal article consider a database for you to look into the relevant research area. So the next one, we were going to give you an example here. So I go to the Journal of Business Research. This is also a very good rank of journal, ABS 3. So in this study is in a special issue. How do I know it's in special issue? Because it's already mentioned part of special, part of special issue, and look into semantic literature review. So they are emphasizing a study approach, how to do literature review. And this is one of the journal article that I selected, because here is also a way, okay, I'm going to cite it, or I'm going to export into my tool, maybe a note, for example. And then I can make sure I save the abstract, some kind of guidance, so it will be in my reference list. And also here is another information. If you look into the study, say service value and recovery, and probably you can looking for other recommendation on site, something related to the service, if you are interested in service itself. But if you're looking for service failure, that's another study. You can go further within the same journals. So you can look in the journals search engine to looking for the relevant subject. And here I'm just because I cut this paper, but you can see there's some kind of information given on the left-hand side. They probably to show you the contents of tables, and you can see this paper, they show some tables here and indicates they have show you what is morphological analysis, and they show you the look of it. So that's give you a quick way of to glance about what is this study is about, what kind of analysis they use as a kind of a reference example. So in one website of a journal paper, even before you start reading, all the information given, what you see here, the topic, the researchers, the table contents, the highlights, how you save it, it gives you tons of information to help you to justify. Should I read, or should I download this journal to read? Are they relevant to my research? What are these field about? And also, when you're looking for the author, you can look into what this author publication. You're probably looking for service study or service value study. You probably find, I see this author published quite a few studies on the service failure. Maybe he is the right guide to read the publication regarding the service failure, because he conduct a lot of research in his field. But also looking for the reference he used, there could be some kind of masterpiece related to the service value area to read. And then there would be another further information about looking deeper within your literature. So that could be another way to suggest what literature can you use. So other thing, it could be about how can I do meta-analysis about literature. So literature meta-analysis is about analyzing what has been analyzed. So you analysis of analysis. So basically use a different method to compare. I mentioned about earlier, some people using the study, they say they using all the statistics. Some people using all the interview. Some people will use a case study. So how can you use a different method to identify the study? So that could be another analysis. And the when you organize the literature review for writing, first, what's the structure? Think about the structure. What are you going to do the structure in your literature review? Because you read a lot, sometimes you think about what kind of, I read a lot, can I develop a structure? Because after you read maybe 10, 15 paper, you probably see some commonness, and that kind of structure can help you to develop it in writing. That's some structure there. And also there has some serious research question and what kind of phenomena have explored and what could be unknown. So this is a look into the future study or look into methodology and the future study, because it's methodology about qualitative research. They generally tell you some kind of proposition or give you a phenomenon, and then they will suggest you what kind of analysis they can be done after this qualitative research. So that could be suggested what is important to explore further. And also when you do the quantitative research, they're probably using all kind of statistics. They also can suggest you some phenomenon, but at the same time, what kind of remaining unknown, because in a statistic, they can be very narrow and also being specific in a specific context, and that kind of message can give you about future study. So I give you another example that from my paper in terms of how to do literature review. So this paper is published in Industrial Marketing Management. It's ABS 3 rank. So it's looking for the paper about supplier, buyer, customer triad, and how to end up with this research scope. Because it was beginning, I was thinking about there are so many studies focused on dyadic. A lot of studies talk about buyer, seller, supplier, customers, business partner, etc. And then they always mention about their dyadic interaction affect the third party or affect the network. So therefore, I start to look into in a study they're looking for triad. And when they talk about triad, they start to looking for network. And so they like a stone bowling, and then it's rolling bigger and bigger. And then after reading all those articles, what I see the common part is most of study is looking for dyad, and there are some study looking for triad. And in the triad, there's not much paper with the empirical study. So most of study can be as a conceptual. They don't even have any data to prove. It's just some kind of idea. Some study using qualitative research but not statistics. So it's also suggesting under exploration. So not much evidence. And relate to the triad is so little about some data there. So but what they mention from dyad to triad, they commonly mention about relationship, interaction, communication, and they also mention about conflict. So this is brought my attention to think about, if I'm going to study something about triad, that could be some important element for me to look, because that can be under study and that's a research gap. So I developed some kind of research question, how do triad relationship evolve? Because many studies talk about dyadic and the important about triad, but they didn't study about how they evolve. They don't know how, and what could be positive and negative area. So, and most of study, they talk about supplier, customers and other elements, but not many study talk about supplier, buyer, and customer. This kind of triad relationship. They could be talk about supplier, distributor, or distributor, customer, or supplier, customer, or buyer, customer, but not relate to all three together. So that could be a gap. So how they interact and what's the relationships, which is still echoing what was studied commonly in the past, but still absent. And then look into what could be result into the innovation field, because some study in the dyadic mention lots of innovation and talk about conflict, but what exactly the thing about? And therefore I go further on the literature review to looking for triadic structure and then I can break it down into a structure. How can I classify triad study? What could be evolution of the structure? So sometimes structure could be two-tier triad or three-tier triad, the network or the network. And they have a different definition of it, and how can communication interaction within the triadic relationship. So this is another kind of a breakdown in the detail of the literature review, and then further we talk about innovation and triad. So this is a suggesting how can we do the literature in writing. Okay, so what can we do the critical review? What kind of value in the existing research as a critical light? Like I mentioned about the study that talk about dyads, they extend to element of triad. So, but they didn't do much about it. And when talk about theoretical review, many of the study, they may looking for dyad, but at the same time, they are not much relate to a triad of a different type of triad. Sometimes the triad, they talk about social capital. Sometimes the triad talk about resource. Sometimes the triad talk another theory. And therefore, in the paper I use, that I publish, I use a theory in use, another kind of theoretical review, and what kind of scope, what kind of mapping territory. So I, instead of looking for a supplier, distributor, customer, or distributor, customer, I started looking for supplier, buyer, customer, because it's not study. No study have looked into it, and then create a new research agenda. So there, the last part I give it to you is how can we plan for writing. So first of all, try to make a statement. What's your topic? And think about what's the purpose, what's the object, what's the aim, could be a contribution, and summarize what could be the main points you want to look in with a conclusion of a review. Indicate what kind of information can be covered. So what has been done in the past, what's still absent, and what we know and what we don't know, and what we don't know in something new field. So we can have a clear literature checklist we need to plan, and then that's help us to develop our writing in the literature review.